Donald Trump is inheriting one of the best economies that a president has inherited in a very long period of time. If you look at the fact that something like net migration at the border is lower than it was even before Donald Trump took office.
They just lie. They just lie.
In this video, Tim Pool reacts to CNN segment featuring Scott Jennings. Tim Pool talks about what a great job Scott Jennings does every night facing off against a table of lying liberals. With that, let's watch Tim Pool mock CNN's dishonesty while watching Scott Jennings take care of business. We're going to start off with a short clip of Scott Jennings for additional context here, then we'll get right into Tim Pool.
What we are saying, though, is that prices are going down. What I am saying is murder rates, they actually are going down.
Inflation is still
plateauing.
It is decreasing in rate, which is the entire goal.
But are prices going down or not, just to be clear? No, they're not.
They are down from their sky high rates.
No.
Stop. Let's move on. Next up for
we were just arguing over combat zones. I don't know where we are this morning.
You can argue.
You guys are trying to paint a picture of a country that doesn't exist.
I'm not painting anything. I'm painting. Stop talking. That's what I'm painting.
That was Scott Jennings. Now here's Tim Pool.
This is why CNN's dead. Because instead of having an honest conversation about what's really going on, they just keep bringing on people who lie. And then you get this from Mediaite. Zip it. CNN's Kate Bolden, I don't know how to say her name, and Scott Jennings go at it in heated debate over a January 6th. Well, it's more than that. In this clip, they basically have some dude lying. Scott Jennings calls him out. The dude continues to lie, and they act like it's a both sides thing. It's amazing. So obviously the debate starts with, January 6th was bad. Today's January 6th. Donald Trump, he's bad. And Scott Jennings says, look, a lot of people called out Trump and said January 6th was bad. But I mean, what happened that day? Everything, the machine kept turning. Then you get this other dude who comes out and he's like, Donald Trump's inheriting the best economy. There's no troops anywhere in combat zones. Just pushing these lies over and over again. And Scott Jennings points out accurately, this was the argument that was made before the election. It's an argument that failed. So what are we still doing here? But this is what CNN does. They think we're going to play this game where it's like, we'll just keep lying to people because that's what both sides mean. I'm going to say it for you again because I've said it before. The only difference between left and right in this country is whether you know what's really going on or you don't. So I'll throw it back to that viral clip when we had that young Luke Beasley on the show. And we were arguing about left committing more violence or right committing more violence. And the problem with it is that left and right doesn't mean anything. They say the right wing is more prone to violence. But you're literally just saying anyone who doesn't agree with leftist social orthodoxy is right wing. You're lumping in anarcho-capitalists who want to live in Chihuahua, Mexico with no government to a white nationalist, neo-Nazi type guy who wants to create an ethno-state. They're not different things they're completely different things. They are not the same in the least bit. That's the problem. So when you look at what CNN is doing, they're basically saying, well, if we're going to have the left and the right, we need one liar and one honest guy. Hence, you get this, zip it. Yelling at it wasn't so contentious. It's not the craziest thing, but Scott's correct. And there are people who live in this false reality. We have troops in combat zones. We had an American soldier, I believe, as Scott Jennings points out, lose his life in Gaza, which is a combat zone. And they lie. Well, my friends, let's roll tape. Before we do, my friends, head over to castbrew.com to pick up some delicious cast brew coffee.
If you're watching this video, I'm assuming that it's not a surprise to you that CNN lies through their teeth all the time. But you will notice on these shows, even though I think Scott Jennings is goated and does an amazing job being the lone sane person at CNN, when he starts getting too factual or too logical or making a case in which the dummies at CNN just can't refute it, they do exactly what you saw in that video. They basically tell him to shut up. And they have the power because they'll just cut to commercial. I've seen that. They have many ways they can, even if he wants to keep talking, they can just cut him off. But the way Scott Jennings keeps his cool when he's literally witnessing supposed news people flat out lying, like, like the description Tim just gave. Are you going to try to tell the average American that prices are going down when they see that, in fact, every single day they're not? I guess you can't expect an entire mainstream media machine to change overnight, but you think they'd learn some lessons after the last election that, our old strategy of just lying ourselves out of everything, it doesn't work anymore. Oh, and I love that they brought up that both sides thing. That is also a leftist liberal commentator move. It's essentially equivalent to them to saying shut up or cutting off your mic or something when they say it's a both sides thing, because then it minimizes what their side did, and they'll try to make false equivalencies. Well, you did this, when you're talking about something egregious that they did, and then it muddies the water for the viewer, and they know that. So if you ever hear a leftist commentator say it's a both sides thing, it's because they're completely out of ammo, and they've got no response. So it's their cut the microphone indicator, essentially, or muddy the water indicator. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
For yourself. Let's roll.
Political sense, is it how we got here? Is interesting, and you can see the evolution. You can play all the sound bites from the days after when you heard Republicans blaming Donald Trump, some being short of saying he should be impeached, saying he should be held accountable. And 4 years later, we are here. It is a stunning political comeback attributed to how Trump played it afterward, how Democrats played it afterward, or something else?
Well, I think it's some mixture of everything, but to me, the big message is that in the United States, the people decide. And because of the disastrous 4 years that came after Donald Trump, the people decided to return Donald Trump to power.
Indeed.
And that's fundamentally what happened. They looked at what happened on January the 6th. They looked at all the things Democrats claimed about Donald Trump, and they also analyzed every single decision that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made, and they delivered Donald Trump a convincing victory 4 years later.
It is tough, though, Scott, because when you say the people decide, that's what people tried to make sure didn't happen on January 6th, was allowing the people to decide.
So what, lady? So what? You know what this is? She's making this comment for the sake of appearing impartial, but it has no bearing on what Scott just said. Everybody saw January 6th. Whatever you think about it. 4 years later, they said, yeah, we want Donald Trump to be president.
And the machinery turned. It was a terrible...
The lack of acknowledgement of how bad it was in the aftermath.
I mean, I think a great many people have acknowledged it, but also what happened that day.
The
machinery turned. Joe Biden became the president.
Yeah, and Scott's right, but my response there would have just been, lady, it was a bad day. But you want people to come out and scream and cry over something that happened several years ago, which they clearly do not care about. I give you this, Kate. You keep saying acknowledge these things. We did. It was called an election, and Donald Trump won. That should say everything to you. So, Scott, I understand he doesn't want to go down that same road as Ryan did. And so he's like, yes, okay, we acknowledge. No, I reject this. Well, first of all, I got no problem saying rioting is bad. But I'm going to say this. Clearly, the American people don't think it was. So you sit here behind your desk on your high horse and say, why won't you acknowledge how bad it was? Well, I got to be honest, lady. Not only do I think it was not nearly that bad, it was bad. We don't want it to happen again. You find a cop, you go to jail, fine. But the American people also disagree with you. So who are you talking to? You see, why won't they acknowledge?
If you like watching videos like this one, like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video.
Acknowledge it. We all showed up on election day and acknowledged it. And the result was we do not care. Thank you.
He had one of the worst terms of any U.S. president, and then the people scrambled back to Donald Trump. That is the history of what happened.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I look at today.
That looked like a jump cut, by the way, but anyway.
Donald Trump is inheriting one of the best economies that a president has inherited in a very long period of time. If you look at the fact that something like net migration at the border is lower than it was even before Donald Trump took office.
They just lie. They just lie. It is insane to me. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just pull this up for you. The state where the price of eggs has increased a whopping $10 days after California's $9 surge. The photos and videos
I mean it when I say I don't know that there's a prominent Republican alive that when asked about January 6th doesn't condemn it and acknowledge that it was terrible. We may argue about the narrative. I certainly feel very comfortable in saying there was zero attempt to overthrow the government, and I've detailed why I believe that 8,000 times, but I don't condone it. You know, people should be punished if they commit crimes. Again, we can argue the fairness of the punishments or the lack of due process to some of these folks. So not only when this woman says, well, it seems like the right doesn't acknowledge January 6th or whatever she said, that's completely incorrect because it's been talked about ad nauseum. Not to mention, we're reminded of it every single day on the news. We get to hear the news' narrative all the time of, you know, the attempt to overthrow the government and what they believe happened, or I don't even think they believe it, how they spin what happened. And the fact that Joe Biden's presidency was so bad that the American people reelected the person that you labeled as Hitler and a dictator. Tim and Scott are both right. That is the American people acknowledging January 6th and what they think of it. Clearly, I'm not the only one that thinks it was not what the media described it to be. And Bakari Sellers, with a straight face, trying to tell anyone that Donald Trump is inheriting the best economy. Again, the mainstream liberal news media thinks that we are such morons, we being the average American, that we can sit there and look at eggs being outrageously priced, but they can tell us that prices are going down. And we're going to be like, well, the news said it, even though I don't have any money in my pocket. Every American should be insulted by narratives like this. And I'll finish with this. Tim said something earlier. The difference between the left and right is one side knows what's going on and the other doesn't. What a great way to describe it, because once you've been woken up to the ridiculous narratives that are pushed, you can't unsee it. And then you start seeing it everywhere. Not as a conspiracy theorist, but you just start realizing, oh, that's why they've always said that, or that's why they've always said this. You start to get it. And that's why it's so analogous with the Matrix and the red pill and the blue pill. And, you know, red pill's gotten way overused, but it really is like, once you're aware of what's really going on, you can't go back anymore. And I've joked before, sometimes I wish I didn't know about the Matrix. You know what I mean? I didn't take the red pill. I take the blue one because I can just walk around aloof and happy, and everyone's got my best interest in mind. And if what I watch on the news tells me the truth, it'd kind of be nice because I wouldn't have to try to decode, you know, figure out what the underlying goal is of the narratives that we hear on the news all the time. But we want to hear from you. What did you think about what Tim Pool had to say about Scott Jennings, as well as Scott Jennings' interaction with the dopes at CNN? Let us know. Anyway, as always, we really appreciate you watching, and we will see you on the next one.